This video is brought to you by NVIDIA GeForce RTX 40 series GPUs, delivering industry-leading performance and unmatched visuals in games like Star Wars Outlaws, Black Myth Wukong, and Dragon Age the Veilguard. Veilguard is launching day one with RTX-enabled ray tracing and DLSS 3 for super smooth frame rates. It joins the now 600 plus games which benefit from NVIDIA's RTX tech, so stick around to the end of the video to learn more about how NVIDIA's hardware and technology will transform the way you play.
A few weeks ago, I flew to San Francisco, the land of clam chowder and bison, apparently. Got to hang out with our editor Stu, since that's his hometown, but the main reason I was there was not for Stu, it was to go hands-on with one of the biggest games releasing this year, Dragon Age Veilguard. Wait, Dragon Age the Veilguard. God, that does not roll off the tongue. EA offered to cover the flights and accommodation, but as with all our previews, we declined and covered all of our own costs. We do that to guarantee you truly independent coverage, unswayed by the allure of free trips. It's our money on the line when we talk about games, not the publishers. So I got to play a surprisingly hefty amount of time with the game. What I thought was like a 2-hour session turned out to be almost a full day, about 6 hours in total, in fact, only broken up by lunch and interviews. We were playing on PCs with the option to use keyboard, mouse, or controller. I played on controller because it seemed like the go-to for this one. The game was running on ultra settings with DLSS set to quality. I'm pretty sure it was running on a 4090, though I can't confirm, but everything you see in this video is my own recorded footage. Unfortunately, I only realized in editing that my recording is sort of shifted up slightly, cutting off the top, so if you're wondering why the footage looks zoomed in a bit, that's why. I've also done my best to ensure this video is spoiler-free, but if you want to avoid visual spoilers as well, you can just listen to this like you would a podcast. Let it be known that I was entering this preview with cautious optimism. The game looked visually impressive from all the marketing released so far, but the combat seemed a little rough around the edges and the facial capture looked equally stiff in some cases. Both were disappointing to see for a Bioware game so long in development. But after about 6 hours with the game across various scenarios throughout Act 1, what do I think so far of Dragon Age the Veilguard? Honestly, I came away from this preview quite impressed. In fact, I'm more excited now than I was going into it, as most of the concerns I had have since been alleviated. Now, this may not be what old school fans of the franchise are hoping to hear, but what surprised me most about my time with the game was how closely it resembles God of War, between both its combat and overall structure. I get the sense that's very intentional. In that way, it finds a niche for itself, as this blend between the cinematic grandeur of God of War and the RPG systems that Bioware is known for, while distancing itself from the likes of Baldur's Gate 3, which was likely to be a comparison that cannot be ignored. As a result, the combat is actually pretty good. It takes the solid foundations of the action combat playbook and elegantly weaves in the team strategy elements of Bioware's previous games. Combined with decent itemization and distinctly flashy character classes, there's some compelling gameplay and buildcraft going on here that appears to find the right balance of servicing both seasoned RPG players and newcomers alike. My reservations about the facial capture looking outdated were also mostly quelled, and despite having such short time with the game, I found myself already rather invested in this cast of characters. I think the cleaner art style that Bioware have gone here will likely still be a point of contention, but as someone who's more partial to that stylized aesthetic and isn't really attached to the previous Dragon Age games, I really came around to how this looks. As a matter of fact, I found this to be a pretty stunning game overall. For fans of classic Dragon Age, that shift in the gameplay and art direction might feel jarring, and it's understandable to be skeptical about mass market AAA games these days, especially so for Bioware, whose latest outings were less than stellar. However, as someone eager for a new entry point into the franchise, I appreciated the bold decisions made here and left hopeful that this studio's return to the spotlight is set to be a spectacular affair.
The ritual must be weakening the veil. There are a lot of scared people out here.
And a lot of demons. Haven't seen this many come through the Fade in years.
My hands-on preview began with character creation. Now, I know many were dying to see how that looks, so I spent a good deal of time with it, and I'm pleased to say that it's a very robust character creator. You can pick from one of 4 races as usual: elf, dwarf, human, or kunari. There's a ton of sliders for granular control over every detail, going as deep as things like cataracts in the eyes to the melanin in your skin. It's got everything you could hope for, really, including face paint, tattoos, loads of hairstyles and beards that look incredible, by the way. And look, unfortunately, I don't think the kunari are going to be dodging the Megamind comparisons anytime soon. Try as I might to make a gruff, battle-worn brute, he would always come out looking like handsome Squidward with horns. This is mostly a result of the art style, as characters in general look quite polished and clean, but that's a point I'll come back to later. You'll then pick your base class and character background, both of which have an impact on dialogue, as you'll see in a moment. I was then thrown into the prologue, which was the same mission that we saw from the initial gameplay reveal. Solus is tearing open the veil, inadvertently letting demons spill through, and we need to stop him. It continues the story of Inquisition, but fret not if you haven't finished Inquisition or you're new to the franchise, because a handy recap from Varric, combined with a feature I'm not allowed to talk about, did a pretty effective job at getting me up to speed as someone who also hasn't finished Inquisition. When it comes to the narrative, there isn't much I'm allowed to talk about, and I don't want to spoil anything since story is one of the main draws of Bioware's games. All I'll say is that while all this is early on, I still found all the beats I played through genuinely compelling, especially with regards to our relationship with Solus. It seems we'll be getting to know him rather intimately throughout this story. Just how intimately exactly? I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's in this first mission that I quickly got a sense of just how much my choices have an impact. In this opening tavern scene, I was able to either talk my way out or approach aggressively, resulting in 2 completely different cutscenes.
It's not a demand, it's an offer. Telling me what I need to know is the smart play here.
The background I picked was the Shadow Dragons, and multiple times throughout this level, that background was referenced by both ambient and main characters.
Nev, meet Rook. Both of you have done some work for the Shadow Dragons.
Isn't that a coincidence?
Some old friends said if I was working in Tevinter, the Shadow Dragons are worth trusting.
There was one pivotal moment, though, where a choice I made that I thought would bring me closer to Nev, the companion I wanted to romance, resulted in her getting injured. So in the following chapter, not only did she appear bloodied and bruised, and I feared for our long-term prospects together, but this meant that she couldn't join me on the next mission. Eventually, we'd go on to meet a new companion who'd fill her place, but straight away I can see how decisions like this can impact things on the gameplay front, since I'd be absent her abilities that might synergize with mine, or those of the other companions. There was one particularly huge decision that I'm not allowed to show or talk specifics about, but all I'll say is that it resulted in a completely different boss fight and had significant implications on both a gameplay and narrative level. This stuff isn't as frequent as, say, Baldur's Gate, where almost every exchange, no matter how minute, have choices with meaningful outcomes. But at the very least, it is at the level you've come to expect from Bioware's games. Notably, companions don't just have a linear approval system, they seem to take notes about your personality as well, based on your dialogue choices, and I'm really curious to see how this changes interactions in the long term. The companions were really one of the standout parts of this preview session. Many had a pretty adverse reaction to them in the announcement trailer, and yeah, I mean look, the Borderlands-y introductions probably wasn't the best choice, but having now spent some time with them, I really dig this team that Bioware have put together. Lucanus, for example, will be a favorite among many, I suspect. Tormented by a literal demon that lives within him, he knows his value in battle, but is equally cautious of that power bringing harm to others. He's the latest I can fix him character, as it were, sprinkled with some Antonio Banderas-like suave.
I don't like leaving you alone with a demon.
You don't have to worry about me.
Lucanus.
Please.
Nev was also interesting, with a cold and calculated nature that contrasts nicely against Balara, who's at all times upbeat and optimistic, perhaps overly so.
But he could just take you over, make you do what he wants.
It's, not great, but kind of good news, in a way.
There's a sort of Guardians of the Galaxy found family vibe to the group, and I recognize not everyone's going to click with that, but I was really into their dynamic by the end of my preview. Some of my favorite moments were just when everyone was sitting around a table or in front of a fire, debriefing on events and bouncing off one another.
But he's not a normal mage, like I told you. He's an elven god.
Putting together a nice ritual doesn't make him a god.
Between their backgrounds and personalities, each of these companions have such strong identities, and for that reason I found myself already quite invested in them despite the short time I've spent. Their voice performances fall a tad flat sometimes, and the writing, while mostly good, lacks a little bite in that everyone's a little too polite, but I'll reserve judgment on that stuff until I experience the full story. What's sure to get a mixed reception, and already has, is the general art style that Bioware have gone with here. I'll say up front, personally, I think Dragon Age the Veilguard is a very good looking game. I wouldn't say it's pushing the boundaries of AAA visuals, but it's not far off. Environments especially look fantastic, from the magic-fueled city of Minrathous to the Venetian streets of Treviso, all packed with detail and gorgeously lit. This section that took place in an underwater keep was a real highlight, real Atlantis vibes. I mean, you can see I was just constantly stopping to take in the sights. Each location has such distinct atmosphere. I mean, after 6 hours playing bits and pieces of the first act, it had already felt like I'd gone on some crazy globe-trotting adventure just by virtue of how visually diverse these locations are. It's got this sort of painterly look to it though, heavy on the bloom and post-processing, which I didn't mind overall, but it does result in characters looking a little airbrushed, and that's all on top of the character designs lacking any significant scars or blemishes. Everyone just looks very polished, very clean, and it's quite noticeable given how frequently close-ups occur during dialogue. I can't deny that smoothness of it all gives this sort of PG-13 look to the game, and that kind of strangely clashes with the darker, bloodier scenes. If you are someone who is hoping for a more grounded visual style akin to the older Dragon Age games, this might end up being a pain point for you that can't be easily ignored. The game's also copped a bit of flack for the lip sync and facial animations too, and yeah, I mean, it's not the best, but I think the sheer fidelity of these models, along with their distinctive designs, combined with a great use of lighting, did a lot to mask those problems. A Star Wars Outlaws situation, this is not. By the end of my session, none of these things bothered me, and to be honest, after Baldur's Gate, Elden Ring, and Dragon's Dogma, I personally found this more stylized, ultra-high fantasy look quite refreshing. So, the game is visually impressive overall, the characters and story are intriguing so far, and your decisions have lasting impacts. That's all cool, but also more or less what I expected going into a Bioware game. Now let's talk about the stuff that was a little unexpected, the things that genuinely surprised me during this preview, that being the combat and overall game structure. I played a decent amount of Dragon Age Inquisition in the lead up to this preview, and I was reminded of just how MMO-esque it was. It was basically a single-player MMO. The combat was tactical but slow, laying on the auto attacks, popping extra abilities every now and then for utility or damage. The structure of the game was also MMO-y. The main quest would guide you to quest hub areas, you'd pick up a few and were pretty much forced to do them for both the XP and these token things that would let you unlock the next main mission. These side quests were more often than not pretty menial tasks, and as such these sections of the game felt like needless padding. I can appreciate what Bioware were going for here, and it's still a good game, but I can also see why many bounced off it all those years ago, myself included. The good news is, depending on who you ask, both the combat and structure are entirely different in Dragon Age the Veilguard. In fact, the closest comparison I can think of is the new God of War games, and that's a comparison I really couldn't shake, for better or worse. In terms of structure, the campaign will shuttle you through semi-linear levels that contain a number of branching thoroughfares to loop back to, many of those extra pockets opening up via side quests, campaign progression, or hidden keys. To initially get to each of those levels, you run through the Crossroads, a Erdtree style place that exists outside of time and space, though this doesn't just mask a loading screen, it also contains unlockable areas and treasures to find. Each level is divided by small combat arenas. There are brief puzzles and combat challenges that'll reveal chests containing gear that can be upgraded at a special vendor, yada yada. all the standard RPG stuff, but you can see where I might draw that God of War comparison. During my interview with the game director, I asked if Inquisition's side quest padding would return here, and thankfully, no. They're entirely optional, but do serve to bolster the main story and characters. I imagine in much the same way that Ragnarok's side quests did. I couldn't do enough of them to really comment on their quality, but I did get to do Lucanus's companion mission, which I can't show. It took me to all new locations within Treviso's underbelly, had a couple neat encounters and mini-bosses, all leading up to a cool final boss. Where the God of War influence is felt far more keenly though, is in the combat. A lot of the abilities that would have lived on your action bar in previous Dragon Age games are now either baseline or activated via combos. Every class can block, dodge, has a basic light, heavy and jump attack, even a ranged attack. For example, as a dual-wielding rogue, I can still access my bow for ranged attacks by simply holding the left trigger. Likewise, the warrior has a Captain America-style shield throw no matter what weapon you've got equipped. Instead of armor being stripped by different elements like they are in God of War, here they're depleted through either light, heavy, or ranged attacks. There are these gems you can equip for an extra instant activatable ability, similar to the talismans from God of War. There's a healing potion you can recharge by smashing objects. There's an execution after filling an enemy's stun meter. So yeah, I mean, while it obviously lacks God of War's impact and air juggling, it's easy to recognize that influence here, right down to the impact frames and cinematic slowdown of time when activating an ability. This is quite a departure from the real-time with pause combat of the other Dragon Age games, so just like the art style, that is not going to be to everyone's taste. But it is a strong combat framework, and if you're into action combat like I am, you'll be well served here. It does feature things that seasoned fans will appreciate though. Things like the ability to hot swap between two weapons, and the return of healing magic, so you aren't totally reliant on potions. Crucially, I think the way the companions have been woven in here quite neatly combines the team-based strategy of the previous games with this new action-driven model. You probably know by now that you cannot swap to your companions. That change was met with criticism by fans, and I totally get that. I personally though like the immersion that comes from being locked to my own character's perspective, and in that sense I do prefer the compromise that's been made here. At any moment during combat, you can pause time to bring up this radial menu, allowing you to target specific enemies with you and your companion's abilities, as well as see their elemental resistances and weaknesses. You'll actually be using this a lot, mostly because of a combo system brought from an unexpected place: Anthem. Now, fun fact, I have spent more hours in Anthem than I have any other Bioware game. Take that as you will. Yes, I agree, that game sucked on many levels, but one of the only things that game did well was this satisfying primer and detonator mechanic that was the crux of this combat loop. You'd maximize using abilities that would prime a target with an effect, and other abilities from yourself or from teammates would detonate those for huge damage, emphasized by a deeply cathartic sound effect. To my delight, that has basically been dragged and dropped into Dragon Age the Veilguard, and to be honest, it fits like a glove. Abilities can either prime or detonate an effect on top of their usual functionality, and in that pause menu, you're able to select two complementing abilities to fire off at the same time, causing those eruptions of damage. This was kinda present in Inquisition, but it's far more prevalent and intuitive here because there's fewer abilities for you to juggle, and those synergies are very clearly telegraphed by the game. Like, it'll literally just highlight for you the abilities that'll work together. So combat becomes this exciting dance of real-time action, dodging unblockables, maximizing stuns for executions, while momentarily pausing to nuke high-threat targets with ability combos. All of this is propped up by some great buildcraft too. My favorite part about it has got to be the class design. You'll pick one of three classes, the rogue, the mage, or the warrior, with 3 specializations for each that you'll unlock through this skill tree. You can equip a maximum of 3 abilities that can be swapped at any time, alongside an ultimate for each spec. Likewise, you can respec at any time for free, but you cannot change your base class. Guess I'll be doing multiple playthroughs because damn, like all 3 classes are seriously quite tantalizing. For example, I love the archer or rogue fantasy, but I'm often disappointed by their actual implementation in games. They tend to be the most mundane to play, both in terms of their gameplay and visual flair. But here, the rogue is sick as hell, in one spec utilizing all manner of Legolas-style flips while firing volleys of magic-infused arrows, but in another spec becoming a sort of crafty tinkerer, complete with turrets and bombs. I thought the warrior might be a bit basic then, felt that way in Inquisition, but trying it after the rogue, no, they haven't been overlooked either, with an edgy Death Knight playstyle in one tree, and in another summoning all manner of spirit weapons to tear through enemies. Shout out to this dropkick move, by the way, that sends enemies flying into the stratosphere. I mean, I never, literally never, play the mage or wizard archetype in games, just not into the slow caster playstyle. Here though, I was able to spec into the Spellblade tree that's a frantic dance between both melee and ranged spells. Doing so gave me a few lightning skills, but then I found a node in the tree that buffed fire spells after using a lightning spell, and vice versa. So then I put some points into the fire side of the skill tree, combining this with companions who could detonate my priming abilities. I very easily concocted a build that absolutely blasted through the final mission in my preview. Every class is just cool, man, like they really are, and the build craft that accompanies them is both meaningful and intuitive. You aren't dealing with a minuscule 2% here, a 5% there. Every bonus falls between 10 and 100%, so it felt like every point mattered. This extends to the itemization too. Each piece of gear has a few key bonuses, including a special build-defining perk that gets unlocked through various means, like wearing a certain armor weight, or even having high reputation with a faction. The way those perks are forecasted means that even if a piece of gear doesn't fit into your build yet, you're still able to see how you might build around it down the road. It all really comes together and cleverly interlinks. I don't want to oversell the combat. I mean, it still feels a little stiff, particularly the dodge. The abilities are awesome, but do lead to crazy visual overload, and not being able to play as the companions does mean that if you're bored of playing a warrior, your only option is to start over. It remains to be seen if what's there is enough to sustain a full playthrough, especially given how chunky this game might be, but with such solid fundamentals, fun classes, and flexible buildcraft, I'm confident it will be enough. And I'm not alone in that opinion either. I mean, everyone I spoke to after the preview also left pleasantly surprised with the combat. Overall, it's a great mix of individual agency and team camaraderie that quite well complements the themes of companionship present throughout Dragon Age Veilguard, including its namesake.
Take out a god. End this today.
People are dying right now. You need to listen.
All in all, I came away from Dragon Age the Veilguard rather surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I had several concerns with what I'd seen so far, especially so given its tumultuous development. I mean, it's changed hands a number of times, lots of senior talent have left the studio, there were rumors of it being a live service game at one point, and yeah, I expected to see traces of that stuff dragging down the final product. But no, as I said, every part of this has somehow come together. The dynamic combat is fun, buildcraft and customization is great, the companions were easy to connect with, and the visuals had me quite keen to immerse myself in this world. I think Bioware have done a good job here at updating the Dragon Age IP while retaining the elements that make their games so memorable. Also worth noting that everything I played here was just snippets from Act 1 of the game, of which there is a total of 3 acts. The conclusion of Act 1 already felt like the end of a lot of other big action games. I mean, it's left a great first impression to say the least, and if the rest of the game manages to maintain this level of quality, I think we're in for a hell of a ride. There's a clear vision for Dragon Age the Veilguard that Bioware seem to have delivered on so far, but whether or not that vision clicks with you is another matter. I think some people will still approach this with trepidation, and that's fair enough. Its departure from the franchise's roots, that of a grittier, more strategic fantasy RPG, may make it a more challenging fit for those who cherish the Dragon Age days of old.
Nonetheless, the game's overhauled systems and grand presentation does create an inviting experience for people like me who struggled to get into the previous games, and for fans willing to embrace this evolution. Bioware have got a lot to prove with this one, and I guess we'll find out once again whether they'll sink or swim when Dragon Age the Veilguard releases on October 31st.
If you're thinking about picking up Dragon Age the Veilguard on PC, then you may want to think about playing it on a GPU from this video's sponsor, Nvidia. We all know who Nvidia are, the undisputed leaders in graphical technology, and they've held that position for as long as they've had because they've been utterly relentless in the innovation they've delivered in both their hardware and the technology that pushes that hardware even further. It all starts with the GeForce RTX 40 series GPUs, Nvidia's latest and greatest hardware that delivers industry-leading performance. If it's raw processing power you're after, then the 40 series is unmatched. But it doesn't stop there, because Nvidia GPUs are more than just their throughput. They're also about the proprietary Nvidia technology that can push that hardware to new heights. Nvidia DLSS 3 is one example. DLSS 3 uses AI to interlace additional frames in between those which are being natively rendered by your hardware. This can often double and sometimes triple your frame rates in games. Games like Dragon Age the Veilguard, which is launching day one with DLSS 3, and you can see on screen what a massive performance boost that's delivering. Also day one with Dragon Age the Veilguard is support for RTX ray tracing. I got to see this firsthand at a demonstration at Gamescom in Germany, and seeing the ray trace reflections at work here make a big difference given how many reflective surfaces there are and how much light is spilling out onto the scenes owing to all the magic spells being cast. Ray tracing in most games is a nice upgrade, but it really does feel like a bit of a game changer here in Dragon Age the Veilguard. As of last month, over 600 games are now enhanced by Nvidia's RTX technology. That's tech that delivers visuals and performance that you simply cannot get from other GPU hardware, and that's what makes Nvidia's GPUs the undisputed market leaders. PC gaming is at its absolute best with AI-powered Nvidia DLSS, so if you'd like to learn more about these games and this technology, then I've left a link to Nvidia's DLSS page below. Thanks Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.